topics, Dan.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and council members and audience. Thank you. You will be talking, as the Mayor said, about the downtown development regulatory framework. We've been talking about it for a few meetings here. So tonight, what we've got planned is we'll do a quick project recap where we've been, the 2 proposed map changes. We'll talk about 3 map areas for further discussion. We had a discussion last meeting about some additional downtown transition uses, and then discussion about public participation as well, about the model that staff had proposed in the staff report there. So we'll go back quickly into the project recap here. We've had 2 meetings of the Comprehensive Planning Ad Hoc Committee earlier this year, 3 Planning Commission meetings, 3 council meetings, including tonight. And interspersed within the council meetings were 2 business and property owner open houses we held here to get some feedback from the business and property owners in the downtown. So that's where we've been a little bit. What we've so far accomplished thus far is we've looked at 4 zoning districts: the DC, which is downtown core, downtown edge 1, downtown edge 2, and downtown transition. We've agreed on geographic boundaries, where the downtown is, height regulations, density setbacks. The majority of the uses, we'll get into some discussion on downtown transition uses. And then design guidelines, where we talked about updating the content and then trying to tailor each of the design guidelines into each of the districts as well, because right now it just talks about downtown in general. So those are some of the points that we've come to some agreement on those guys. What you'll see here is we'll move into where there's a couple of map areas that we are thinking about changing and recommended changes. The original recommendation here, you can see we've got our core area in the downtown, we've got our edge 1, closer to the edge 2 on some of the outskirts, and then the transition areas you can see further out. So at the last meeting, one of the areas that was discussed was the southwest corner of Washington and Rogers here. So Tivoli Theater is here, and then also the 922, the new 922 is there. Currently, as originally proposed, that was downtown transition. We heard from neighbors and some concerned citizens. So the recommendation is to modify that to DE1. Right now with the downtown transition at the mid-block change, there was some concern about the buildings behind them being able to be tall and these buildings smaller. So we've recommended changing that whole block to DE1. The second area that we had some concern on, which was a new concern that was brought up at the last meeting, was in the forest and over the southwest corner. That's on downtown transition. There's 4 parcels there. They're relatively small parcels. And looking at that, some of the concern was that if we have the DT setbacks, it was really going to limit where they could build. So after staff looked at that, we were going to recommend that be converted to a DC, downtown core zoning classification, because those properties are so small. The core would allow them to build closer to property lines and along the sidewalk there. So those are 2 areas, Washington and Rogers, and then Gilbert and Forest, where we've proposed to change. I'm going to move into the next areas, the 3 areas that need a little bit further discussion. The first area is on Main Street, on the east side of Main Street, between Rogers and Franklin Street. So I sort of tried to zoom in on a map here, and the railroad tracks are right here. And so our train station is right here. This area is principally single-family homes that have been converted to business uses. The original recommendation was to go to a downtown transition. Similar to the other area that we just spoke about, Rogers and Washington, when you look at the setbacks and where those buildings would have to be, that's going to really create a tight space to redevelop those areas. So the thought would be to convert that area to a D2 classification, which has a little bit less setback requirements. So there's more buildable area on those. It does increase the height slightly, but again, it provides a more buildable area for those property owners if they were to redevelop. So that's one area that is a potential change that we're looking for some additional council discussion on and direction on.
Stan, question for you. What you mentioned, the small difference in height. What is that difference between the?
So right now it's a 36 to a 60. So it's a few stories. It's a couple of stories of height. I think it's basically a 2.5, 3-story building to a 3-story building to a 5-story building. And then, but the things that will limit that height will most likely be parking and density then, because if we keep where we've agreed in the past on parking, where it's 1.4 parking spaces per dwelling unit, if that were to redevelop to a condo building or an apartment building, the parking would most likely limit the availability of height there, just based on economics and design.
Thank you.
I'll move on to the next 2 areas that we would like to see some additional discussion on. So this is the map as it is currently. The first area is at Maple, the north corners of Maple and Washington here. So if we start on the northwest corner, this is the parking lot here. That one parcel is designated as DE2. Upon looking at this a little bit closer, we're concerned that this could be construed as a spot zoning here because it's one parcel without any additional DE2 touching it. So we would like to discuss that a little bit more, if whether that should go back to a DE1 or if other parcels around it should convert to a DE2, which then would maybe make this feasible. So we're going down from 70 feet in DE1 to 60 feet here at the DE2. So just with that one corner, you'd have a little bit more setback and a reduction in height. What the concern is potentially by the spot zoning. And then the second area of concern in this sub area here is the northeast corner of Maple in Washington, where currently it's a downtown business zone classification, and the original thought was to change to a downtown transition. So that reduces the height. And then we've heard from residents and property owners about the potential difficulties in redeveloping with the increased setbacks both off the front and then off the rear as well, to limit the buildable area on these parcels here, running up on Washington Street on the east side there from Maple Avenue. So that's one area that we would like some additional discussion on the map. And then the second area was a specific property owner that came in to talk about two properties at 5109 and 5111 Main Street. This was a height concern principally. So what the concern was, Manager Fieldman and myself met with the property owner. The concern was the maximum height. So right now the downtown core, which permits a 3-story building up to a maximum of 40 feet in height. So you can see this is the Acadia on the green building back here. We pulled this from the pattern book. This is their property right here, so it's a 1- and 2-story building right there. And what they're currently allowed to, under the proposed regulations, what they would be allowed to build would be a 3-story building up to 40 feet in height. So as we talked about before, 40 feet in height gets you a 15-foot first floor and then a 12-foot ceiling and then another 12-foot ceiling, which gets you to 39. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there. But it gets you a 3-story building. Their concern, the residents and the property owners' concern, was that Acadia was built at 4 stories up and that they would prefer to have 4 stories as well. So that's another area of discussion with the height. If the thought is if this would change to permit a 4-story building here, then we should also look at the U.S. Bank site across the street, because that sort of frames that corner at Burlington, which is right back here, Main Street there. So those are the areas with the map that we're looking for a little bit additional discussion on tonight.
So with that, I propose that we take these in reverse order, and we should start opening up the council discussion here on the Heritage House site with the model we have up on the screen.
Well, that's what I was just going to propose, so I'm glad you did. I'll go first, and we can walk through it. Well, I'll just take it one at a time. Just a little bit of background on this one. I know some of you probably know this, but originally this parcel was supposed to be acquired to be part of the Acadia project. And we actually tried very hard to get a hold of that back at the time in order to build Acadia. And if that had been acquired, this would have been part of Acadia, and it would have been 4 stories. It would have been exactly the same height as this. So in my mind, that always should have been 4 stories anyway. It just, we weren't able to get a hold of the parcel back then. And because of that, it went ahead without it, and it is what it is today. But it's always been contemplated. I mean, that doesn't mean just because it was contemplated then it has to be done that way, but just from my perspective, I have no problem with this being 4 stories, because had this been acquired back in the day, it would be 4 stories today. So on that, I have no problem with that, and actually fully appreciate what the concern is. Now, remind me, what was the comment about that across the street? Is it if it goes to that 4?
If it goes to that, then the thought would be for the U.S. Bank building to allow them to have that height as well to sort of frame.
So there's symmetry there?
Symmetry there, correct.
I wouldn't have a problem with that either. Thoughts on this before we keep working through it?
Well, I don't know that I've got a real strong opinion one way or another right this moment, but I thought we were doing this, one of the drivers on this thing was to create this core that wasn't as tall. I mean, I think that wasn't that a real intentional change, to have this lower core, then upper, then lower again kind of a premise. So I mean, it would have been, but it wasn't. So it isn't. So the question is, what are we trying to accomplish as a result of these changes? And that's, I thought there was a lot of logic to that idea of trying to keep a core that was a little smaller so it didn't become a canyon on the Main Street. So you can see how quickly the conversation goes to, well, if that one, then this one. right? I mean, that happens instantly. So, my inclination right now is to keep it like this. I'm not ready to decide anything tonight, but I want to revisit, if we're going to change it, then I want to rethink through this. Why did we have the core to start with?
Sure, I think that's a good question. I think we're seeing it, we've seen it over, let's be candid, I think what we've seen over the last several months is concept and then implementation at street level. And I think what we're seeing, and we're also seeing a lot more engagement from the community and the people who own these properties. It's one thing to talk about things in concept. It's another thing to get down in the dirty and actually talk about where the Lego blocks stack up and what that means for people's lives and what that means for the community. And I think what we're dealing with now is the actual in the trenches kind of stuff. So it doesn't surprise me at all that as we start really focusing on the bricks, that there's going to be some adjustments for the concepts. Because the concept is one thing. I had a concept when I designed my house a number of years ago. When I actually had to build it and you do things in the field, anybody who's ever done this knows this firsthand. Things change. And concept is concept, reality is another thing. And I think what we're seeing here is a blend of those two things, of concept and aspirational stuff with practical, actual realities that are also dealing with private property rights and people's economic livelihoods and things that we also are charged with being good stewards of to the extent that we can. And I'm not suggesting that any of those things run in, but this is all a blend. And I'm just giving you my perspective because I was probably the only one that was here back when this was proposed, and I know that I've always thought that was out of place, and it should have been that in the first place. And frankly, if it had been built that way, nobody would think any different of it because, it's always been there. It's no different than what's in the corner. And the reason why I don't have a problem with at least exploring that or having that flexibility across the street is to accomplish some of the things that I've heard talked about around this table in the past about opportunities for that U.S. Bank building. I think you may want to have some flexibility there for a little bit more in order to make it what it really should be. I don't want to rein ourselves in from things that are going to be long-term beneficial to the community. That's all. So that's just my perspective.
Could you go back to plan view, please, on that?
What are the heights of Acadia? Not the turret, but the basic building.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
It's probably right around 50 is what it amounts
You
to.
have 4 stories and 50 feet?
So the real question to Commissioner Barnett's sort of line of thinking is really, where do you draw that line? And you can see that there's a transition at that property, and I think you brought the question, if we're going to do this concept, where is it? I think there's sort of textbook planner answers that you could apply to keeping the lines where they are. Right now they're asymmetrical at the corner. If you draw the line one property south and have the U.S. Bank match, I think it's still the same concept. It's just the policy question, literally, where do you draw the line?
Well, in almost every instance, in the last 6 weeks, and certainly in conversations about these subjects prior, existing property owners are going to seek to preserve maximum use flexibility for the long term. Every one of them. And that's just going to be, I would too, right? I mean, it's your parcel, you'd like to have as little restriction on your possible future activities on that parcel as possible. So that's sort of one starting point for the conversation. And the second one is, either what problem are we trying to solve or what vision are we trying to foster? And they're going to many times be in conflict. Biggest, tallest, densest is going to be the best for everybody that owns a parcel, for sure.
Yeah, but it may not be best for the community. So
Right.
we have to
That's
strike,
what we're wrestling with.
Well, we try to strike a balance the best we can.
Right.
Because the economic performance of properties also can be beneficial to the community at large. But it's all about a balance. It's about the big circle and the little circle.
But now, so Matteo, your proposal would be 4 stories, but 50 feet, the same with Acadia?
Yes.
So then that would mean 4 12-foot stories, and they would lose 18 on the first floor. They lose the opportunity to have 18 on the first floor. Because 12 plus 12 plus 12 plus 18 will be taller than Acadia.
We gave very specific height examples. We're really looking for a zoning classification.
Right.
So let me make sure we're talking about the same things. Where do we want to draw the line between DE1 and DC?
I'm not designing buildings.
No, but where we draw the line depends on how tall the building's going to be, not how many stories, how tall it's going to be.
Exactly.
Correct. Right, and that's all my point. Is the height. Because if it had been, well, again, it is what it is today, but It was supposed to have been basically an extension of that same piece around the corner,
But it wasn't.
only because it was too expensive.
But it wasn't. There's always a reason.
It was too expensive.
I'm kind of in the same place as Bob is at the moment. I'm struggling between the vision that we're trying to, I think that we've been talking about and discussing, and property rights. So, and again, my decision isn't made up either, but I think, given what we've been talking about for a long time now as to what we want this area to look like, I think I'm leaning more towards less at this point in time, though, again, I've not made a decision.
A little more on the history. Okay, how tall could have Acadia had been? Because if it's 50, they're 20 feet shorter than they hypothetically could have gone then back then, is that right?
So the question is, what is the current height limitation in the downtown business district?
Currently it's 70 feet, but there's no stories limit.
And Acadia was built at 50, even though it could have been 70.
Right, and that's where the parking ratios and economics came into play, and it's
Right.
really parking and density that drive the actual building height.
And that'll drive this building too.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, as a practical matter, it will.
Well,
It just gives you a bigger box to play
Yeah.
in, but you can only fill the box so much based on economics and practicality.
so we're saying, given the classification, let's go to 50 feet. Because if you make it a DE, it can go to 60 feet, right?
Well, DE1's up to 72.
Yeah.
So we have lower in the core and then 72 to the DE1. And
I don't
60.
want to let them go higher than Acadia.
No.
Right, then that would translate that as keep it as what's proposed. Because we can't really do lot by lot heights, that would be spot zoning
Right.
concern. So I would say, I would interpret that comment as keep it as a downtown core.
Because if you change it to DE2 or DE1, if you did, we'll just forget DE1. If you change it to DE2, that's 60 feet, right?
Correct.
So if we reclassify it as DE2, they can be 10 feet taller than Acadia.
But then we're getting into a spot zoning
Right.
Yeah.
issue then with the size of
Right. So, that's true, because it's next to DE1.
Right. So
That complicates
it's
it.
more it's more of a downtown core or downtown edge one is
If it
what.
was easy, everybody would do it.
Well, I guess there is another way to approach it. It's rethinking the heights allowed in the downtown core. I'm not necessarily advocating for it, but I mean, that's the other way to go.
3 to 4.
Because I tend to agree. I think, walking in tonight, I was probably 51-49 in favor of allowing the DE1 and the taller height until
But it'll be
the number
72
came
then.
out at 72, and no, that's too much.
So,
Well, if you change the core, I don't know, this is maybe not the right order to do this, but if the core were 50, not 40, it'd be the same height as Acadia.
right.
Yeah, I'm not saying I'm for that, I'm saying that would do what you said.
Right.
Right.
And
We could make it 45 and give her 5 feet, give everybody 5 feet, and then we're done.
Right. Well, it literally occurred to me in the moment. I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying if folks really wanted to go there, we could go there, in theory. But yeah, I think we keep this property as it is DC.
As an original proponent of the lesser heights, I've changed away from this, but a year ago, I was thinking like I wanted 2 stories. But the point is to avoid an urban canyon effect down Main Street and down Curtis. That's the policy goal, is to avoid an urban canyon effect. Whether 40, 40, or 45, or 50, 40, but,
Right. It's a question of what's the difference between a canyon and a trench.
right. And there's a sense of enclosure too, because actually I was persuaded by the pattern book that too little height doesn't give you the proper sense of enclosure.
Correct.
So you need a certain minimum height, but you can't
Right.
go too, so it's, and there's these triangles in the pedestrian, it's really interesting.
So what I think staff just heard is keep it as downtown core at the heights that have been proposed and on the table for several months now.
I think what would be worthwhile is to do some calculations with the parking, because this may actually be a real issue in real life.
I don't think it's a practical issue unless
Right.
they start to acquire multiple properties. So the likelihood, the only way they'd be able to build by right is if they went with some sort of commercial use on multi-stories because there's no parking requirement. The parking and density requirements effectively give the council all the control that they would need to pick the height that they want if a development proposal came through.
Well, probably.
Probably.
I mean, if somebody can also do what has been done a couple times, which is read our book and lay something on the table that fits.
And
And
they-
we're not controlling the market for financing.
That's correct.
They can do it or not do it.
That would require multiple levels of underground parking.
See, we're all sitting there thinking they probably can't fund,
Right.
but that's not up to us to decide.
Right. I would describe it as extremely unlikely.
Well, in the current climate, but you know what's
Right.
coming in 20 years, that's the problem.
Right.
The policy goal of that Main and Curtis Canyon thing is still something that I think there's a lot of value to. So that's why I'm inclined right now to leave it as it is.
So I just want to double check again that what I'm hearing.
That's what I'm hearing.
Is direction to keep it at
Keep it
DC.
DC,
Okay.
at the existing 40-foot height,
Yes.
3 stories, yeah.
Okay.
So we'll go ahead and move backwards then. And we'll talk about the area at Maple and Washington Street. Would you like to do the northwest corner or northeast corner first, Mayor?
I'll leave it to your discretion.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and do the northwest corner there. As I mentioned, this is a single parcel here with a DE1 surrounding it, with a single parcel requested for DE2. The thoughts at the Plan Commission was to have this step down closer to the neighborhood there. Staff's concern is the fact that could be construed as a spot zoning there, just with that being the only parcel that's zoned DE2, without any DE2 being contiguous to it as well.
Well, I don't want to make the whole area around it DE2 just to avoid a challenge. But let's go back to some of the practical implications of if that was DE1, what's going to realistically happen there? Would it end up being stepped back anyway?
That's a pretty decent sized lot, so I think you'd have to do some underground parking to get the height, as we've seen in all the other developments along Maple Avenue. There's some semblance of underground parking. So I think to get the 72 feet in height, you'd really have to go underground probably 2 levels to get the amount of parking there to facilitate a larger development.
This, I totally agree with Stan's point, but because it's a larger parcel, I think it's an increasing likelihood that they'll get closer to the maximum height in the district, whatever we put that at.
Is there some other way we can arrest that development, so to speak, without?
Well, just
I don't like the.
to step back a step, it seems to me that acquiring the 2 residential lots, they're not being used residential, the one is being used residential, immediately to the west, that would be the DE1 development site. It'd be all 3 lots. Would be the optimal way for a developer to come at it. And then they got more square footage, and then they would basically match Marquee and Main and Maple.
Correct.
For better or for worse, that's what I predicted when they first approved it. It's going to be all 3.
So the option then would be to pull the DE2 line further west on Maple to incorporate.
That's a different option, yeah.
Oh, well, if this were here,
Just pull it two properties.
Or just
west.
pull it
the
Just those
yeah, the
two
two
right there.
parcels, yeah.
is that lessen your concern?
We put more parcels into the district, so yes, it does.
Remind me then what that does to the setbacks. Because there's also street wall issues too.
So with the edge 2, then you have a 10-foot setback on the edge 2.
And what's the edge 1 setback?
The edge 1 setback is 0. So you would be pulling it back there. Now, the existing, the Main and Maple building is 2 or 3 feet back from the property line, and the Main and Maple is 10 feet back from the property line currently.
Marquee is 10 foot.
I'm sorry, the Marquee, I apologize.
See, and it's
The Marquee is
complicated
10 feet
because
back, yeah.
when you go up
That's
Washington, there's bigger setbacks. and there's a parking lot. Actually, could come to think of it, a 5202 parking lot could be assembled into that too,
Correct.
and a 5202 building.
The building just north of there, yeah, right there, setbacks are pretty similar to, they're about.
They're pretty close, I want to say
Gotta be
about 10 feet or so,
right?
because there's a little bit of landscaping in the front.
So if you, I guess I'm kind of thinking that, again, what we're doing here is, playing with the Lego blocks to create a vision and a view, and I think a DE1 there with a zero setback would be counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve, given where Marquee sits as well as the building on the north. You have this potential, if you made DE1, you have this potential jut out to the curb of 6 stories.
So that idea would be to pull DE2 north 2 properties and west 2 properties.
Go to there and then out to
Yeah,
there.
that's kind of
Yeah,
what I'm
I
thinking.
think that does it.
I like that.
That makes sense to me.
Okay. Any objectors on the council? Okay.
So then the next item of discussion will be the northeast corner of Washington and Maple. So currently that's all zoned downtown business. And the proposal was to change it to downtown transition. And there's changes in setbacks off the front property lines, then setbacks off the rear property lines as well, which would potentially limit the availability to redevelop those properties. So the discussion was to see what, if that should change potentially to a DE2, which would be a little bit more height but less setbacks, again, similar to what we had talked about doing up here. So,
I thought the issue too, though, was creating non-conforming lots. So the non-conforming buildings, so if there were a casualty, a fire or something, then it would be. 'Cause
the uses as well, yeah.
the
uses are
existing residences would be across the DT setback line.
Mhm.
And for me, that's a bigger problem than, putting these people in a non-conforming situation. It's less extreme than we'll talk later about Forest by the library, but it's the same philosophically, it's the same concern. And I've actually looked at a lot of the other numbers. I don't have a problem with DE2 very simply because they can't do what would be bad in DE2, and then there's not enough land. It's just the setbacks.
Well, it depends on how far north the development goes, right?
Yeah, it depends on the consolidation of parcels.
Is that, I've always viewed Washington as sort of the dividing line. In my mind, the east side of Washington is unmistakably residential. And, not all of the uses necessarily fit right into that, but the building sizes and feels, to me, are residential.
Mhm.
Now, that changes as you go north up Washington, obviously, where we get into the DE1 and DE2s here. But as you proceed east on Maple, that's residential. And to create a situation where, or I guess cement a situation, because it already exists, where somebody could put a 60 or 60 plus foot building up, I think just doesn't fit. I mean, west of Washington, yes. East of Washington, no.
We've got, one of the concerns I think that's here is that if you had tried to recreate the existing uses, the setback situation causes problems, right? I think that's one of the big problems folks have is, hey, the existing use couldn't be redone. And it's, so we're trying to figure out how to balance that with this clear goal, which is to stop the creep of downtown, right? And then, so the height problem with DE2s, I think to Greg's point, starts to feel a little funny there. Is there any, what happens if you change all of, the DTs that I'm looking at up there, many of them are in the same category of existing physical use, right? So what happens if you change your DT setbacks?
Well, you would just then, right now, with the transition, you're looking for more green space in the front and more green space on the sides and the rears. So you would just, in essence, then, we haven't gone lot by lot to figure out where those are, but you would just, your setbacks would become more in line with the DE2, so you'd have more buildable area there, but less height. So instead of potentially getting with the DE2, sort of a larger building, if you decrease setbacks, you'd have a shorter building, but bulkier lower building, I guess is what I would say.
My sense from whatever public comment we've gotten is that that height issue is a pretty big deal. That people don't, I don't know that people are necessarily paying attention to 20 feet versus 10 feet on a setback on the front as much as they're saying that you look at the size of that building. So I don't have an answer for this, except that my inclination is to not put ourselves in a situation where the most likely redevelopment is 4 or 5 or 6 stories in these DT areas.
The intent of the DT was to try to keep existing character and allow for a mix of,
Small commercial, small office, and residential.
so I think, if I interpreted your comments right, all the zoning districts we have on the board, DT would be the closest for that vision.
I think so, and I'm thinking that maybe we could alleviate some of the concerns of the existing owners by changing setback requirements.
Got it.
What is the current DT, what's the proposed DT setback?
20 feet in the rear, 5 or 10% on the sides, and 20 feet in the front. So it's 20, and in essence 5 feet or 10%.
And just make sure I understood that, you'd be okay with that setback change district-wide?
Yeah, I'm trying not to turn this into 45 districts.
Right. Okay.
Just looking at the places that we've currently got identified as DT, I think they all physically look similar right now.
Okay.
So what would you propose it be changed to? 10 feet, the same as DE2?
So for purposes of we're in a framework for a bullet point discussion, I think what we would do is, we would take that as general direction, and by the time we got the ordinances in front of you in a couple of months, we will have surveyed the other DT areas, and we could propose something to you.
Yeah, minimize-
We haven't really looked at it that carefully.
Minimize the creation of non-conforming uses. That's a
It's a
legitimate
good
bullet
way
point
to
goal.
frame it. Good way to phrase it.
Yes.
Minimize the creation of non-conforming uses.
Non-conforming structures, right?
Right, non-conforming structures, yeah, uses and structures, structures versus uses.
Yeah.
We what you said.
Yep.
Should we take some public comment now?
When we get through the rest of the
Oh, sure.
items,
Okay.
and then do that.
Okay.
So the last area then again was this area up here, or one of the last areas was this area here from Rogers to Franklin Street on Main Street. So in the original proposal, it was downtown transition, but we had suggested going back to DE2 based on setbacks and uses in those areas that way as well.
The change of the setback solves that problem.
Yeah, it could, yeah, very well could, yes.
When we looked around at this 2 or 3 maps ago, I know I was concerned with that being tall because of the Highland Avenue residential parcels. So DE2 and DE1 strike me as a problem there. I don't think they fit what we're trying to accomplish, because you could have a residential house on Highland looking out their back door at 60 feet. It doesn't seem like what we're trying to do.
So if you
I was gonna
change,
say the same thing.
if you change the DT setbacks to minimize the creation of non-conforming uses, then to have it be DT is less burdensome on the existing owners.
So I'm writing down 3 council members support that idea so far.
Sure, make it 4. There you go.
Nicole, Marge, any thoughts on, because now that concept is in play on 2 of the areas we've highlighted.
Correct.
And will impact other DT areas as well.
Yeah, I'll go ahead.
Next.
Recognizing that when we get to the implementation phase, the actual setbacks will be in an ordinance form, and we'll have more information about the actual impact of these things.
Correct, because we've just looked at a high level of this concepts and the key features here and the key points. We haven't gone down to the individual lots to take a look at the impact
It's
yet.
always different in the field.
It is, yes. So,
Been the same driver here, though. The
Yes.
setback question has
Right.
caused us consternation with that. Main Street question, and then also the next one we're about to talk about, it's the same question.
Sure.
The setback thing, we got everything else screwed up.
So the next area going in reverse order we talked about was Gilbert and Forest, this corner here. There are 4 really small parcels here as well. They are actually, a couple of them are smaller than the parcels in these other areas that we've talked about as well. So staff suggested taking that back to downtown core, which gets you a 40-foot height instead of a transition height, which is 36. Again, it's pretty similar. What the difference is going to be is with the core, there's no setback on the front property line. So you can build right up to that sidewalk, the public sidewalk. And again, that would just, likely any redevelopment of that would have to take into account all 4 parcels, because all those parcels are so small that you're going to have the older single-family homes remaining there.
And talk to us about uses, Stan.
So with the core, you're going to get more office and potential shops and more of a commercial feel to it. Transition, you have more residential components that are permitted in that area. Transition is smaller commercial. We'll talk about uses in a little bit here. The smaller commercial uses, whereas if somebody wanted to build an office building here with the core, they could do that for a 2-story building pretty easily. Well, easily in terms of uses, but probably a challenge with the unique site design.
Fill in the site up to the sidewalk, which would DC would allow you to do.
Correct.
Up to potentially 40 feet.
Correct.
Forget about uses and parking stuff. To me, seems like it fits, given the building that's on the old TCF site, and then also the first building on Curtis.
Mm-hmm.
First building on Curtis it's got a little bit of an L shape to it with
Yes.
some green out front, but I think it's got to be at least 4 stories, right? Maybe 5.
It's 4 stories, yeah, at least.
So you're not changing the massing for the neighbors much there.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm fine with DC.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then the final area, first area that I spoke about tonight was this area at the corner of Washington and Rogers Street there. So originally that was a downtown transition. And we had some folks come in and were concerned about the fact that they're surrounded currently by the Tivoli Theater and then the 922, and there's a pretty good grade change there between the back end of 922 and where they're located. So 922 is 3 stories, and with the grade change there, it's really a 4-story building. So they had some concerns about this being downtown transition where, again, they were going to have separated, I talked about it a little bit tonight, but then again about the height and what they're surrounded by. So staff suggested that we make this whole block a DE1, again, partially because this is a mid-block change for a zoning change as well, which was some of our concern.
Makes sense.
That's another one I don't like. The other part of the DE1 on sort of the west end of the Rogers portion of that block has a pretty substantial physical difference versus a potential new development, and that's in setback. The back end of Tivoli certainly is tall. There's a pretty decent setback there. Got to be 25, 30 feet at least. And so for the residences on the north side of Rogers, you put DE1, you've got potential of 60 feet on the curb. That's a whole different animal. I'd be wanting to still think through DTs with setback changes, because DT still gives you a 40-foot tall building. It's not like you're only limiting them to 1-story residential. So if you change the setbacks, allow 40-foot building there, you still have sort of a step down from Warren to Rogers to the residential parcels. It's just, that's a 60 feet on the curb with a big damn building when you're sitting in a house across the street.
What's the height in the DE1 with the grade change?
In the DE1, you can go up to 70
level, so to speak?
Well, you can go up to 72 feet in the DE1, as proposed, 72 feet with a max height of 6 stories.
So you've got a grade change there.
We've got a grade change there of, I'd say 10 to 12 feet on the wall of 922 Warren, until you get to where the units are that face.
And those are
face Warren.
So which is higher, Stan? Which street is higher?
So Warren's higher than Rogers. So if we're walking from Warren through here, you're coming, and then there's a 10-foot drop on that back wall, 10 to 12 feet probably, and then out to
So
Rogers
it's going
there.
to step back no matter what. It's a question of how much of the step back you want.
Yeah, right.
Because Mother Nature's made sure to step back.
Right.
But it's the same backyard condition we were worried about on Highland, right?
I feel like it is, yeah.
But this situation's already in play because 922 is there.
Yeah.
You know, like, I'm not saying I'm enamored with 72 feet on that stretch of parcels there, but at least it's on the other side of the street on Rogers. I mean, at least with, what about the concept of DE2, because you've got a 10-foot setback there? I mean, it doesn't limit the height as much, but at least it buys you 10 feet off the curb.
How many parcels are there, Stan?
I believe there's 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yes. 6 or 7 parcels there. And the other thing with 922 is it reads taller as well, because it's the back wall, 3 stories of living space, and then they have a roof balcony as well, so it reads a little bit taller as well, more so than the 3 stories in height.
What's the height of that building in 22?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I'd probably say it's 36 to 40 feet, and then with the additional roof features, it's probably another 4 or 5 feet up in the air.
Yeah, but so think about that for a minute, guys. You can go to 72 next door. Pretty tall.
Yeah, I'm struggling with that too.
Pretty tall.
Think about changing just,
I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
we could change the whole block to DE2.
Because we're minimizing nonconformity.
Well, but would there be, that's my question, would there be a nonconformity?
Yeah, because the
The 922's on the curb.
Tivoli is right on the line, and the 922 is right on the property within. a couple
Oh,
of feet of
a setback
setbacks.
nonconformity.
Yeah.
Now, there's at the corner of Washington and Rogers, the northwest corner, that's a residence there. What's immediately to the west of it at the corner of Bryan?
There's 2 smaller garden apartment.
And those are what, 3-story?
2 stories. I think 2 stories with a garden apartment. 2.5.
Yeah, it's a weird.
Yeah.
They're about the height of a normal.
That's about two, yeah.
Yeah, so there's 6.
And they're set back. Yeah.
Single family here, apartment, single family.
Yeah, because the first story is set down a half a story or so.
It's a tough spot because you've got the canyon issue on those parcels right there on the south end of Rogers. But you also want to avoid creating it for those just north of it.
Well, if you just discarded for tonight's conversation setbacks in DT, because you're kind of up in the air, buildable heights and massing of DT is still pretty big. Combined lots, 40 feet. I mean, it's not a little building. It's a lot different than 72. It's not a real small building on the backside of 942.
Yeah, it's the setbacks, and that would be the
Well,
height.
and the objection isn't that they're not able to build the same height as 942. It's just that because of what are they concerned about, the grade change?
They were concerned about the grade change, but then they also felt like they would be surrounded by other taller buildings, and that they should have the same rights as those taller buildings, as being able to build that tall. But then there was also concern with the grade change as well. And
This to me is, which neighbor are you comparing these 6 properties to? That's the real question.
right.
Yeah, well, I tend to focus on the block because it's a block.
Yeah.
I'm not oblivious to what's across the street, but to Greg's point, we're slicing and dicing up a block. I don't know.
You know, the other, talk about terminating vistas and stuff. And if we start at Main and go down Rogers, the Station Crossing building has a substantial setback and probably intentional terracing kind of effect on Rogers. And then Tivoli's got a parking lot, which has a similar kind of an effect. To Greg's point, I mean, I personally want to limit it a lot more, but I certainly want to create some kind of a continued setback along that block up to Washington. zero interest at all in allowing that to go right up to the sidewalk.
Would you do mid-block and switch it to DE2 at that location, which gets you a little bit more height, a little bit more setbacks?
What I do?
Well, I mean, I guess that's one of the options is to, stay. We looked at it, it's a whole block that way. But you
Change
could
the
do
setbacks and
DE2.
make it DT is what I do, but that setback thing on the front side is a pretty big deal, I think, for the whole question of what does that street look and feel like.
What were we just getting at, Stan? Were you talking about?
Well, I mean, you could, I think there's probably enough here, there's enough parcels here that we might be able to do a DE2 back in that area, potentially where it was DT, and then leave the rest of this DE1, because then you wouldn't be necessarily creating nonconformities with these buildings, with the Tivoli structure, and then with the other one. Because I think the thought is that if the structure's next to, between the Tivoli and the 922 or whatever redeveloped, we'd like to maintain that sort of street wall there. So I think it's important to keep a DE1 on this side of the street so that you maintain that sort of street wall, because it's a very urban feel next to the train.
Yeah, that's where you want to
and
keep it.
stuff. And so then maybe this refers back to DE2, where you have six
blocks of
parcels or
train
so, which brings it down to 60 feet. There's still some redevelopment opportunities there, but it provides a little bit of a setback.
Anytime you're likely to have a residential component, it increases the likelihood that they won't max out their height. And since that doesn't front on a commercial street, I would say that the odds of building a current economic environment foreseeable future is pretty minimal. So,
You're talking because of the parking lot, that's the
yeah,
reason behind it.
parking and density combined are what
Right.
drives the practicality of.
Well, that's why 922 is the height that it is. It isn't 72 feet.
Right.
Forces of gravity.
So that DE2 makes a lot of sense. I'm looking at, I think Enzo's head was, yeah. From the staff perspective, I think that DE2 makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bob wants to make it R4.
I actually had that
Maybe
previous
R3.
discussion.
I believe, because we hit this one, we hit that one, we hit this one.
Hit 'em all?
We hit that corner, so I believe that's all the map ideas that we need to talk
All
about.
right, well, let's pause. We talked about height, setback, and density stuff on the map. Let's open up the public comments on that topic. We still have use and design to go. But on what we just discussed, questions or comments from members of the audience, please.
Do I need to stand or?
You don't have to.
Okay. I want to revisit your discussions on the northwest corner of Maple and Washington. I am an owner of the west parcel to the parking lot. In your discussions, it may look good on paper to minimize what you've allowed on that streetscape. That's why if you are familiar with the landscape of those properties, it's right now those are positioned between an older apartment to the north that's already 4+ stories. There's a parking garage directly behind to the north, and there's the new condos. Well, there is a building in between, but I'm kind of looking as a long-term plan between the three parcels, the parking lot, my parcel, and the one next to it. If you limit that at a shorter height at E2, you are impacting what can be placed in the corner, like you're hearing from, I'm sure, other development opportunities. But what I want you to keep in mind is if you do minimize that height, now it becomes a real difficult play because you have a parking garage that's behind you that may be taller than you. And if you live there or you're in that rear space between the garage and the home, all of those cars really echo in that between the three pieces, and it's very loud. And I think if you keep a lower structure, it really causes damage to the property instead of being able to go higher and get over what is built there with the parking garage. The other aspect is on a commercial play, which I think is a really smart piece for those three parcels. You are one of the last pieces of property that is adjacent to the parking garage. And I think it's really interesting when we have a mass parking concern that if you are going to have some commercial play that you put it right next to the parking garage. So I think that that is an interesting corner long-term commercially. I'm not thinking residentially, but anything can happen. That's something, great can happen there with the parking garage right next door. I think, I hear you talking about changing the zoning or maybe keeping it for the corner, but it looks good on paper and it sounds good, changing the landscape because of what you've already approved on that street. But I'd like for you to reconsider that and keep that landscape the same all the way to the corner. And I think it could be something very exciting for the town. If you keep that in D1 and have the extension to the corner.
That prompts a question for me. Stan, what's the difference in the rear setback between DE1 and DE2?
So in DE2, it's 10 feet, and in DE1, it's 10 feet. But if you're adjacent residential, then there's some other typical additional
Actually,
stuff.
really, any rear setback against the parking garage is kind of just wasted space.
Yeah, and it comes down to a building code issue too, is you can't really build a building up to the property line with windows on it then. So the architect's probably going to design it back so they can have operable windows on that facade as well. So it comes down to a practical standpoint too.
But the rear setback's the same for DE1 and DE2.
Correct.
It's the front setbacks that'd be different.
Correct. And the DE2 would have a 60-foot max height with a max of 5 stories, and so then Marquis on Maple's it's 5 stories, so that you get that same height with DE2.
So is the DE2, if the development rights were maxed out, is that the most similar to what's in the field at Marquis and Maple?
Yes. Because Marquis on Maple is 5 stories, and you go up to a maximum of 5 stories.
With a 10-foot setback from the street?
With a 10-foot setback from the street, correct.
It's true of the north building too, right?
Excuse me?
It's true, that would also be true relative to the building north.
5202 building.
Yes, so
That building's-
You would add those two parcels then too, that would be.
That first structure north is 5-ish with a setback of around 10 feet.
I
5 or
can
6.
picture the building, I can't count the stories on it, but yeah, but it's about a 10-foot setback, yeah. I think it might be 4, though, that's,
The shoulder apartment building with the north balcony, that probably won't change look, or it won't be, I don't think it's a redevelopment aspect. So again, these 3 pieces together, I'm recommending that we keep the landscape the same, keep it all in D1. Again, you're at a parking garage, so it's impacted already, being up against that to the north. We want to be over that and have it available to be something attractive instead of limiting it and putting you at a level of a parking garage and concrete to the other side with the condos that were approved.
What's the 10-foot rear setback, kind of to Bill's question or comment, what's the 10-foot rear setback driven by? Is that driven by safety access? What drives the 10-foot rear setback?
on the rear property lines, we usually ask for an easement, so that's where sometimes you'll see the utilities. So typically along a rear property line, we have a 10-foot requested easement for utilities back there for stormwater conveyance a lot of times. From the practical standpoint, it really comes down to being able to get water around the building and off the building, and having somewhere for, like with the Marquis on Maple in the back, it's a water quality thing, so that's where their post-construction best management practices are located in the back of the building, so it gives them a little bit of space. And then with a building code, the closer you are to a property line, the less window openings you can have, and you can have windows, but they just can't be operable. And so the further away, the more window openings you can have, and so that's a safety thing with fire spread, and then also with clear air and stuff.
Also, emergency egress is the other code
Right.
that interplays with the zoning that you want to make sure that they're aligned. And so usually 10 feet hits like a variety of things that Stan just read along.
Correct.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Please, Liz.
Would you, on the Rogers and Washington, you went back, you were at D1, I think, and wanted to went to D2? Is that, my hearing aid isn't operating real well?
Yes, yeah. So we originally started at DT, we proposed DE1, and I believe we're going back to a DE2.
D2.
Yes.
What does that do from a setback and a
So from a height perspective, that's 60 feet maximum height with a maximum 5 stories. And then from a setback, it's 10 foot front setback, a 5 feet or 10% allowed with side yard setback, and a 10-foot rear setback.
I probably should have asked this at the beginning of the discussion, but could you maybe write a key up here? Because it's starting to get confusing. And
Oh,
if
sure.
if we had a key with DE1, DE2, DT, with everything, so we could compare it.
Okay, I like the picture. I didn't have a big table there before, so.
There's one.
I've been borrowing
But-
it from Bob all night.
Thanks, yeah. This, if he just puts it up on the, but, there's everybody in the audience too.
So the whole zoning table, height, everything.
Well, yeah,
Yep.
height and setback, and then we can, side setbacks. If you just say yes, that's probably sufficient.
This is like getting called to the math,
Well,
Yeah.
It's like,
Just keep talking so I
So,
can
when I'm all watching Stan write.
Yeah, right.
Other questions or comments on the discussion so far? Yes, please.
I'm getting ahead of this conversation, frankly. I'm a little dismayed to see the direction this is going. It's just, I thought, originally, every time I come to meetings, I thought that one of the priorities was to try to protect our core downtown, and I see it disappearing piece by piece. I'm very sad to see that we're talking 5- and 6-story buildings this close to downtown. It's exactly what I was afraid of when the 2 monsters went up on Maple over there, that, that's going to open that window, and apparently it is. Because it'd be hard to turn projects down when you, all they have to do is point me, well, you let this in, so why can't my project go in? 5- and 6-story buildings, I think this close to 4 is ridiculous. And once these buildings are in place and occupied, we still don't know how we're going to move traffic around downtown. We got downtown as basically 2 blocks. And good luck trying to get through there, especially later in the day. I mean, between trains and traffic and et cetera. Let alone trying to find a place to park. I'm just very sad to see it go in this direction. I think it's going to change the character so much. I feel I should put a sign on each end of the town that says downtown for sale. It's basically the way I'm viewing it now. But that's the way I see it. As a resident, I'm not happy about not this direction.
Are there particular zoning designations here that you changed to something different? Because a lot of this is actually substantially less than what's been historically allowed.
Well, I'm just hearing more 5, 6-story buildings, and I think it's ridiculous. I see the 2 monsters, which frankly, Maple and Main Street, not at all popular with anybody I've ever talked to. I still can't believe that thing was allowed, but it's done. But it certainly doesn't, I don't think residents in town want to see any more of that going in that direction, because it's abominable. And I would certainly like to see some greenery, some setbacks instead of these things. Otherwise, you're going to look like downtown Oak Park. And is that really what we want? So, anyway, that's my...
Just again, are there any particular changes that you would suggest?
I just would like to see lower, certainly don't start increasing density and getting some of these buildings lower.
Sure. Well, the only reason I ask is we haven't had a single suggestion of increasing density. Mostly it's lowering height, increasing setbacks, and decreasing density.
Well, that's all, my opinion is, it sounds like these buildings are getting bigger and taller. And I just, if that's the direction you folks want, there's nothing I can do about it.
Well, I just take issue with your suggestion that we're somehow expanding density and height, because that's completely opposite of what we've been talking about for the last hour.
Well, the buildings, the UC's 2...
Right. But that's why we're having this conversation, because that was then, this is now going forward, and this is exactly what we're talking about, I think is exactly consistent with what you'd like to see.
I'd like to see more, keeping them at 3 and 4 stories. That's close to downtown.
Across the board, nothing more than 4 stories.
Yeah, as you go out a little bit from the core, then fine, you can maybe start building up a little taller. But
That's what the
otherwise,
core is. 4 stories. 3 4 stories.
I got it. Thank you.
40 feet.
Other questions or comments? Yes, please, Dan.
Good evening.
You don't have to say it.
Hey, you know, it's been a long day, what can I tell you? Dan McCormick, I own 5205 South Washington Street, letting you know me. My comment is, of course, the property that I own over 5205 South Washington Street. Right now, it's, you know, projected to be downtown transitional district. If you look at the size of our lots from 5205 all the way to Maple, which concerns 5205, 5211, and 942 Maple, none of our lots would even be considered large enough to do whatever it is that's being done over on Maple. I mean, when Trammell Crow came in, or the other developer came in on Maple, those lots were much deeper. Our lots aren't that deep. We could never do anything that size to begin with. So therefore, I don't think it is proper to designate our 3 little lots or 4 little lots to be downtown transitional when realistically they surround areas that are already D1, D2. I mean, if you look at it, excuse me if I can move over, I mean, the only way we could ever build a Maple Avenue project would be to have this parcel right in here, which is residential, designated commercial, and therefore a huge building. That'll never happen. I mean, my lot right here runs on an angle. The setbacks are killing us if it was downtown transitional. Absolutely. There's no reason to do that. I mean, right now, edge 1, edge 2, we'd be fine. We're not going to really be changing. We've got a colonial here, a residence here, and my office here. They're all 3 residences, and even if we tore them all down, they still wouldn't be large enough to be a large building as going up on Maple. So there really is no reason to take away what we already have by designating our property transitional. It should be edge 1.
I think the proposal is to decrease the setbacks.
Well,
So
that's
you're
the
not-
problem. Our problem would be setbacks. One of our biggest problems would be setback, Bill, because, I mean, right now, my house is set at an angle. I'm in violation of every setback, well, not the front setback, because there's a big front yard, but if there's a 20-foot setback right now, my house encroaches over it by significantly. So if my house burns down, I'm building a garage. And no, I'm not planning on burning my house down.
There's a name for that. Something like
No way. Wow.
Mayor, you joked about it earlier, or maybe it was only half joking, that I actually, in discussing these parcels, had leaned into Dave and said, would it be crazy to go to R4? What would be the impact of going to R4?
Well, your uses are all going to become non-conforming.
Right. What about the setbacks?
You have a 25-foot setback off the front and a 20-foot setback off the rear. So you're going to have more setbacks with an
It's gonna be
R4.
a bigger
It's
problem.
bigger.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's nothing in the R that's less than 25 feet off the street.
R4 is the only one that's 25 feet off the street. So everything else is larger.
It's
Bigger.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so as you get to the bigger lots, you have a
So there's nothing, 25 feet, there's nothing 20 feet, there's nothing 15 feet. It's all, anything in an R is going to get further away from the street.
correct, yes.
My understanding is direction is to look at the downtown's transitional setbacks to minimize the potential of creating nonconformities. So that existing properties will not become nonconforming or minimize the extent to which they become nonconforming by the adoption of downtown zoning.
So
I
changing
thought that
those-
was the task.
Changing those 20s that show up on the stand chart there
to something.
to something less than 20.
Right, so we'd be looking at this to change that.
So rather than change the height, change the setbacks, so you can be downtown transitional and have less nonconformity than you would under what's proposed.
Well, that's a start. That's a good start.
And I think that's the direction they haven't figured out how to do it yet, but that's what they're going to work on to solve the setback problem.
That's a good start.
The goal is to solve the setback
So
problem.
we still hit, the height, because there are still, if you look at the house that's between, I think it's 50 to 11, I think that's, my property is 30 feet high. And the property next door to me, I believe it's taller than me, my house.
To the peak of the roof?
Yeah.
We're doing all our,
It's the peak. On commercial properties, there's a flat roof, it's the flat part, but if it's a peak, it's to the peak.
And I think my peak is, I think the last survey I looked at was like 25 feet. And I know the house next door to me is taller than mine.
Right.
are we doing, at one time, I don't know if it was actually did it or thought about doing it, measuring peaks as a function of slope?
I'm sorry, Bob, I
We were
didn't.
measuring peaks as a function of slope at one point, is it residential that we were
We
talking about?
were, it was to midpoints, and then,
It's crazy complicated.
But that required
Required-
sextant, and it was really complicated.
You know,
yeah.
that was our, that's what we got away from it,
Trigonometry.
we got away
The
from
reason
it.
the reason I bring it up is it does come into play more often than you think. The 36 feet, 40 feet, if a lot of that has to do with mass. Much of what we're reacting to has to do with mass. And so if you start taking a transit out, which
Right.
some really geeky council people have done, and start measuring houses that everybody thinks are classic Downers Grove houses, they're a whole lot taller than what we think they should be.
Right, a lot of this perception.
Right, well, it's because of mass. And
I
so
agree with
as
you.
it relates to some of these questions about what DT should look like, if you've got setbacks and fronts, and you've got mass restrictions, you can probably get away with different heights and still accomplish, which is the goal is to avoid some of these developments encroaching into the residential neighborhoods. I think that's what we're trying to do, right? Largely.
Yeah, and if I can correct myself on the height, so there's all sorts of zoning stuff that's unique. Other than residential buildings, the height is to the mean height between the eaves and the ridge of the roof. So in commercial properties, that's how we measure, is to the mean height if there's a gable. If it's a flat roof, it's to the flat part of the roof, but in residential, we measure to the peak, because then that's mostly, people are concerned about how tall the buildings are to next to them, so we measure to the peak of the roof, but in commercial, it's to the midpoint of the gables.
Midpoint gable.
Yeah.
So why don't we want downtown edge 2 there? Or,
Because the planning vision was that was going to be a transitional area into the existing single family to the south and east.
And so height was the principal concern there.
right. Even though it's surrounded by DE2 and DE1.
In R.
And R.
Yeah, I was gonna say surrounded.
So this is all,
This is all our zoning, this is all
That's all
R4.
Yeah, well, I mean, once again,
Yeah, but that's on the other side of the street. Whereas, the properties that surround the residential is all DE2.
once again, where you draw your secret planner's pen.
Yeah.
So you're discriminating against us people.
How about your side? What are you doing for? Counselor?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, are you done?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
It's similar along Rogers. I think you're going to change that DE1 on the southwest corner of Washington and Rogers. You guys were talking about DE2, and I don't know why you don't expand that whole block so that it's the same. I mean, right now it's a parking lot, but it could be 62 feet or whatever the number is right on top of the other one. So if you're going to do it, you make it similar to those other blocks when you have some of these patch things in there, the northwest corner of Washington and Maple. DE2 is surrounded kind of by DE1, but then you got a hard stop with the street. And to your parcel, same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
I would think something, not DT, but just for that same reason. I mean, the size of those lots, you're not going to be able to build anything mammoth in there.
No, even if you consolidate them all.
Right. So to Dave's point earlier, the density of parking is going to dictate if it's residential.
Other questions on the discussion so far? Thank you.
I don't want to gild the lily because I like everything I heard about my.
There's an old saying when you're winning.
Yeah, sit down and shut up. But I'm in here, and it does make sense that stays that core. Interesting thing is this here, and there's a very tall apartment building here. There's a creek through here. It's in a concrete pipe, but that's always going to be grass there because you can't build on top of a creek. It's a concrete pipe. And in this area is quite a bit of grass with a gazebo that they made. These guys put in. So there's a transition between the core and what becomes the downtown transition with primary residential. So I hear anybody saying they wanted to keep that as whatever the last meeting, but I hope you stay with these.
Thank you. Sure. Thanks for pointing that out, too. Other questions or comments on the discussion so far before we turn to uses? Well, I've got at least two very specific requests.
What was the reason for not, I'm going back to Rogers and Washington, for not making a whole block one, the same zoning?
Well, I won't explain it, but as I understood it, it was concerned about stepping down, transitioning to the neighborhood.
Height.
Because it could be 72 feet higher.
What about going further west on that, Rogers? You have the same issue, don't you? Up the highway?
Yeah, but given what's already there and closer to Main Street,
It's on one, two different pieces of it.
You got the street before you get up a little bit. I mean, and again, the parking and the density is good up. I mean, they're probably not going to put commercial or it's going to be residential of some sort.
Residential's tougher, right?
Residential gets
From a parking
harder.
standpoint.
Yeah, from a practical
An
standpoint.
easier play is a commercial parcel
Yeah.
on these tight spots.
To Commissioner Earl's point, if the economics ever change such that commercial uses become viable multi-story, then this is a whole different discussion because the likelihood increases that you'll max out the heights.
well, or parking changes
Or parking.
would change as they are
Mhm.
over time. There's less and less parking, there's fewer and fewer cars, and people are commuting in different ways these days.
Just add a parking requirement for office use.
Parking requirements have been doing this.
Going the other way,
No,
right?
but if we were worried about buildings getting maxed out, if you add a parking requirement for an office use, not for retail or restaurant, then you constrain that the same way.
Right, but the point is, I think the point is, don't rely upon parking as always being your fail-safe, because that's going to change. In fact, it's already changing, slowly, but changing.
Yep.
But we're going to redo all this in what, 5, 10 years? So we'll take care of it all then.
Isn't we a little loose?
Usually, you guys have fun with that.
We'll call you
I'm going to be sitting out there.
and yelling.
Well, thank you for all the comments so far. All right, should we go to
Uses?
uses, please?
Sure.
Excuse me. So this is the proposed land uses in all the different zoning districts that we've had. So you can see up here, in the black is downtown business, downtown transition, this is existing. And then we space out the core and the edge, and then the transition, and put uses in. At the last meeting, there was a discussion about
I
adding.
didn't see that. You have better eyes than I do.
Yes, so what we're talking about tonight is additional uses for the transition areas, as was discussed, to add some uses in the transition areas, which are the columns on the far right here. If there's any specific questions about uses, I can go over those for any of the other areas. Some of the questions that we had were potentially to add some different uses to the transition area. And as you know, the transition area is sort of on the edge next to the residential area, so it's not talking about the core, it's not talking about anything on Main Street and Curtis. So it's really out on the edges, Forest and west on Gilbert. It's talking about
the area just north of us here on the tracks and those areas like that. So what we looked at were some of the suggestions the council had with animal services. Grooming is mostly just take the dog in for a bath and a cat for a trim or whatnot. So permitted uses, but in a lot of these, we wanted to limit the size because we still do have residential uses in the transition area. So we didn't want a big, large veterinary clinic going in there. So what we noted is the veterinary care services is a special use, a smaller use. Now, they are permitted as special, there are special uses in the corn and the edge as well. So if someone wanted to come in for that in those areas, they could. Research services are principally labs. So that would be a lab, maybe some testing, whether that's laboratory testing in the classic sense or different types of services like that. A wine boutique, again, a permitted use up to a maximum size. We did note that if there was a wine boutique on a Main Street downtown transition zone area, that could be a little larger because that is Main Street. That's the principal street in the village, in the downtown. So that could work for us, especially if we were going to have go back to the Main Street between Rogers and Franklin as more of a transition. That could work there. Financial services are banks. Now, drive-throughs are different. So you can do a bank with just a walk-up ATM, a walk-up teller. You could also do a credit union as a permitted use there. Again, limiting size in those areas except on Main Street. Retail sales, convenience goods, that's like grocery stores. That's going to be like the convenience stores, that type of stuff. We're going to get that. So that's, again, a permitted use of smaller. Retail sales, which is consumer shopping goods. So those consumer shopping goods are more about like a pet store, a clothing store, a toy store. So those type of stores for consumer shopping goods. We also discussed artisan industrial. So that has more of a manufacturing component to it. So we did not necessarily recommend that. There's a use that's a board and brush downtown where you go and paint. That's more classified as a retail type of shop because you go in, you actually participate. It's not production of something. So we would view artisan industrial as production of something. When we get into beer and wine tasting rooms, those are more under the wine boutique. So that's more of a restaurant thing. When we get into breweries, those are limited industrial, is how we classify those. Where they're actually producing beer, bottling beer, and sending them out. And again, with the drive-through use, just based on the discussion about having a pedestrian-friendly downtown and being more pedestrian-oriented, we did not feel that a drive-through use was appropriate in the transition area. It's not currently permitted in the core, so in the downtown business district. I'm sorry, it's not permitted in there currently. It's a special use in the transition area as it is now. So the couple of banks that are in downtown business zoning classification, those are lawful non-conforming, and then the bank, I think it's West Suburban on Main Street south of Maple. That's a permitted special. It's a special use at this point now, but we're recommending not to have that continue, just to create a walkable downtown and to try to eliminate some of those pedestrian and vehicular conflicts that we're looking at. So that's a summary of the downtown use list. I have a printout too, so if there's any specific questions I can answer on those uses.
Just wanted to reiterate something Stan started with. Overall, with this downtown regulatory framework, we are being more flexible with our zoning because going back to 2014, we went to categories, not specific uses. This is when Stan always mentions notion stores and haberdasheries, right? So we are already becoming more flexible by using categories. With this exercise, we're adding a broader use of mix throughout the downtown, right? In general, all zones.
Yep.
This discussion is limited only to one zoning district because it's the only zoning district where we heard a council member or two say, I'd like to be even more flexible. And I just wanted to point out that every single one of those uses would be subject to a 2,500 square feet max. So we're trying to say, yes, you can use them, but they have to be in buildings that meet the character of the transition. Just want to make sure we had sort of the broader perspective on that.
Well, with respect to downtown transition, I'm pretty much okay with all of this. But a topic I think we haven't addressed, I think we have to address before we wrap up our project, is talking about financial uses, things like that. We'll set offices in the core. You know, I'm hesitant to prohibit them, but I also don't like the idea of saying, well, they're just fine and we're not going to do anything about them. So to find some way to discourage them without prohibiting them, I want to see that as part of the final project. Now, how we do that could be complicated. But the idea of an outright prohibition, that bothers me a little bit. But the idea of finding a way to discourage, because I don't think, banks and real estate offices on the first floor in the core create the type of downtown that I'd like to see. Now, those are, put them on the second floor, God bless. Put them in a DE area, that's absolutely. But large banks on Main Street don't encourage the type of retail pedestrian experience that I'm looking for. Now, to say you can't do it, that might be going too far, but finding a way to discourage that use is something that I'd like to see before we wrap up the project.
Can we come back to that?
Yeah, no, not tonight. We're not ready tonight to talk about this. That's my point, not tonight. That's my point.
Thanks. I'm all in favor of being flexible in the downtown because we have to be proactive and mindful of changing trends and economies and commerce that we're seeing glimpses of now. Even the makers movement that I talked about a year ago, where people are manufacturing things and selling them out of what would be traditionally non-industrial spaces. And as long as they're not infringing upon the neighborhood, and people don't know they're not living next to a big smelly factory belching smoke out, but there could be people actually manufacturing things that are of high value. I think we need to not only be mindful of the sales tax, but since we all know that sales tax is a dying animal, I think we need to be more cognizant of attracting businesses to our downtown. And yes, we want to have a pedestrian environment. I'd love to have every single business downtown be one that has foot traffic in the thousands daily. And I think that's a lofty goal to achieve, but I think we also need to be flexible enough to attract that. We also need to be flexible enough to embrace the new economy and where things are going, and not, quite frankly, haberdashery would be great.
Yeah. Real estate houses and banks aren't the new economy.
Well,
So before we go there, so I just want to,
flexibility.
Are we okay with the downtown use, the downtown transition
Yes.
proposed change?
Can
Well-
you guys talk more, you and Stan, talk more about this classification premise? Consumer shopping goods, are we defining that as things for sale at a retail level, that somebody could be doing something and be classified as that even though they're manufacturing something? That was one that I would have hoped for something very different than what I see here. And because I think, to expand a little bit on Martin's comments, there are people creating businesses doing funky things, and maybe it's not breweries that don't want to have a brewery, but the idea that people are, artists are, either painting or welding or throwing clay or whatever it is they're doing, and turning them into real businesses and selling them in a variety of means, whether it's electronically or otherwise, that aren't traditional, and they may work 4 days a week, and every fifth Friday or every fourth Friday of the month they end up opening the place up and hoping to sell stuff. Those are the kinds of things that I'm concerned about artificially limiting. As we've seen with other situations, you have to have I think we create a situation, and I don't want to start down a path that nobody wants to talk about, but food trucks, where if our environment is discouraging enough, then there are other environments where people can start just a whole lot easier, and so they will. And I don't want people to see us as, you know what, it's a whole lot easier for me to do that in a while. Because I think our long-term health and our long-term vitality is creating an environment that attracts people, not necessarily for sales tax, but they want to pay to live in the condo building downtown Downers Grove. And they want to do that for a variety of reasons, and it is probably, that variety of reasons is getting broader and broader, and we want to not narrow it down. So
Let's create our new tax base, not create a new tax.
well, I recognize that sales tax usually.
Yeah, the point I was going to finish is where I was going with this is I'm not crazy about the artisanal, whatever you want to call it, the artisan industrial being not permitted. special use or something like that, but not permitted, because to me, that just says go away. Let's put a big sign at both ends of town that says, we're not open for business, go somewhere else.
I could do special use for that,
Special use is fine.
for artisan industrial.
Is this the definitive use of DT use list?
No.
Okay.
This was the areas that came up for discussion.
These are the
last
changes.
year.
Okay, got it.
Correct.
Potential expansion.
Where would 3D printing fit into this?
Right, we're banning all law firms.
Where would,
Yeah, I would do.
yeah, where would 3D printing fit?
So that's going to be,
That's an example, we had that.
that's more of a copy shop and so that's going to be business support services.
Don't tell the 3D printers that they're copy shops.
So I'm just, this is what, this is the purpose of zoning. This is where
You're so there, they put the cameras around you, you got a little miniature figure view.
We need buses.
It's a copy shop.
Yeah, so it's and it says copy or print shop, so in essence, to me, that's a business support service.
Another dying industry.
So the real question, I interpreted Commissioner Barnett's question in two parts. The one is, if I make something small, and to the mayor's point, not, the manufacturer of it is not impactful, and I sell it, can that go in the downtown area?
So currently, under consumer shopping goods, art stores and studios are considered consumer shopping, art galleries and stuff. So I would consider somebody who's an artist making something potentially to be in an art gallery type use. Woodworking, if that's an art thing where you're selling where I make it in the back and I sell it up front, that's to me an art studio.
So yes.
So yes.
So the second question is, if I make it there, but I don't sell it there, you can't walk in and buy it, is the next part of that question. Can I do that in the downtown?
That's a good question, Dave.
I know, I tried to get a little bit of trouble with it.
So,
If we don't have the answer, we'll get
I don't, what we have is our artisan industrial is manufacturing with hand tools, so that's going to be into similar types of arts and crafts for small scale manufacturing. So I think in that case, if you don't necessarily sell it there, that's probably falling more into artisan industrial.
Right.
So there's a fine line whether you're selling it there, whether you're manufacturing and selling in the same place, or whether you're manufacturing and not. So.
And the reason I ask is we just had one commissioner say, I want to encourage the retail type activities. And if we allow sort of the new makers movement, but they're not selling it because you can't walk in and buy it,
Right.
you only can get it online. That's sort of a policy question for this council too.
Correct.
Well, there's the studio where you can watch them make it, maybe then that's okay.
Well, but it goes, I mean, driving foot traffic, I agree with you, that's important, because you want a vibrant downtown with lots of things to do and destinations, no question about it. But I'm also not just thinking about places that sell stuff, but places that are attractors, and attractors in businesses. And where people are putting business these days, they look a lot different. The arts and crafts movement with hand tools, you're not talking about things that only exist in the digital world. I just think we need to be flexible. I don't think we need to throw open the doors of the kingdom and just say, have at it. But I also was smiling a little bit because
That's what we're going to do.
artistic has been used to cram a lot of stuff into a lot of different zoning categories. I think we might want to be a little bit more focused.
And that's why I asked about that there's a definition of consumer shopping goods, which was for that example that was used in our papers. That basically says retail sales. Like it's consumer shopping.
And we just learned tonight the interpretation is if you manufacture it on site in the back and sell the front, that's a favorable interpretation, yes.
For me, that's too narrow. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I'd like more flexibility.
I'm fine with more flexibility in DT. I don't want buildings in the core where the front door is locked, no one can walk in, and they're making stuff. Not in the core, because that's Main and Curtis where you want
This
storefronts.
conversation was DT driven.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, DT, yeah,
Why we're having it.
yeah. DT, I'm not as worried about that.
Okay, so we're going to change artisan industrial to special use.
Yep.
And you can make other industrial broad. I mean, that's
Got it.
pretty good.
Yep.
But if they want to put a studio on Main Street, you can sit down with lasers, like take an image of your head and 3D print it.
We had that business.
Yeah.
Not that I do it. But I know other people have that.
The other question I had, just to make sure, is drive-through, we kind of bounced back and forth on this in the DT. We started with saying would no longer be.
Well, is it just a bad idea from pedestrian vehicular?
We think so. So, well, at the last meeting, somebody said, I think a couple of council members said, hey, but there's a bank that's zone DT that has a drive-through. And I thought we wanted to be able to let them keep that as.
I don't think so.
It's a non-conforming use.
All right, so, okay.
Okay, so
we're
keep it as
not
non-permitted, okay.
Period. Got it. Thank you.
I think a lot of these changes are not, we're not going to compel somebody to change their use.
No.
No, but right, when they redevelop, they're not going to have drive-through.
I have drive-through, correct.
Okay, good, thank you.
Hold that thought. Anything else on uses before I open up for public comment? Thank you. Todd?
So on the artesian industrial, why do you want to make it a special use?
The reason I want to make it a special use, because right now it says not permitted.
But you got research services, the door's going to be locked too. So I'm just trying, I mean, not necessarily you, because you wanted to make it wider. but
Isn't
why-
that a special use?
Special use
That's a
for
special
research
use,
services,
too.
yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, you're right, okay.
Yeah. I'm not saying yes, but I don't want to say don't even bother.
Right.
I'll say, well, let's see what you got, and if it makes sense. Yeah. We got 50 people back there making stuff, and they're all dining out in downtown, heck yeah.
And it depends what they're making, because some uses, some processes won't be a problem, others could be quite a nuisance.
Right.
Depending on what you're making.
I want to have the option.
Well, considering, when you pay downtown prices for rent, why would you pay downtown prices for rent to manufacture something when you can go over to Ellsworth, pay much cheaper rent to manufacture something?
To get an experience for your younger workforce, that's why. No, seriously, that's what's happening. It's
And-
exactly, yeah, absolutely.
And space size, these are all 2,500 under spaces, so if you're looking for commercial industrial space in Ellsworth, you're not gonna, it's gonna be way bigger, it's way more money than you think. It's very expensive.
What I'm saying is, as opposed to paying a downtown down in the Grove price, whether it's Ellsworth or Westmont or,
Yeah, Ellsworth isn't cheap, man.
no, I'm just saying hypothetically.
But that is the makers movement that the mayor and others have commented on.
Or someone wanted to open up an incubator in the downtown, there's just all kinds of things that we would say, oh, great idea, let's do that, but I just don't want to say no. I was like, let me think about it.
And there's other things too with the,
I'm talking about 1871 in Chicago.
Startup
That's what
incubator.
started that.
and there's other things with
Not
the,
chickens.
with the impact of the external
Chicken
impacts too. So if there's external smells or external noise, that also helps us classify as a more limited or general or more intensive industrial. So really the artisans will, no impact really on your neighbors.
Right.
You wouldn't know they're doing it unless you walk in there.
Right. Right.
Sandy, do you have anything else for that? I think council gave us good direction on.
For uses, that's all I had.
Back to the mayor.
Anything else on, from the audience on uses?
I just had a clarification. So these aren't restricted to just first floor, they can go second floor at different levels, or is this ground floor descriptions?
This at this point is any floor in a downtown transition building.
In fact, we'd really like to see some rooftop dining.
I think that could happen. This doesn't exist.
And been trying.
The product doesn't exist.
Or rooftop
The
really.
operators will come, the product doesn't exist.
There's some property.
Move on.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned. All
Should we move on
right,
to the next one?
let's go to design.
No, not preference.
All right, now that everybody's all warmed up and loose, we're going to talk design.
So the next item that we talked about was public participation. So at the last council meeting, there was a lot of discussion about having more public participation earlier in the process when there's development proposed for the downtown. So what we're looking at is a public participation model that we've developed. Applicability would be to any projects where it requires village council approval proposed in any of the 4 downtown zoning districts. We would require the developer to have an open house meeting. We'd hold it here at Village Hall. Staff would be here at the meetings to hear comments and to discuss. It would be open to anybody. We would have the meeting time would be prior to a formal submittal to staff, because I know we've heard concerns that the project is so far down the road that any changes now really can't happen. So this would provide an opportunity for nearby residents or any resident in the community to come to the meeting and express their desires about the design of a building. We would really be focused exclusively on the implementation of the design guidelines in the downtown. So we would not be wanting to discuss, especially because they wouldn't know parking, they wouldn't know traffic yet, they might not know some of the other discussions that come up at Plan Commission or in front of you. But really it's about the design and the look of the building, the bulk of the building, what materials they're going to have, how they're meeting design guidelines and how they're not meeting design guidelines, so we're going to have some input in that. So it would be really a focused discussion on the design is what we would want to look into at that point with the design. Meeting notification, we require the developer to notify property owners within 250 feet. That's what we typically do for public hearing notices when it comes before. And then we would just follow those requirements in that way into notice. So it wouldn't be a formal submission, so there would be no formal board meeting for the Planning Commission, but really just an informal meeting with folks to discuss design.
Just,
In the meeting notification, a lot of times, people will show up who have seen the sign, because the sign goes up in front of where that meeting is going, that property is going to have the meeting at. Would we be signing the property as well?
We could too, if that was direction, we could definitely do that, yeah.
that's no problem.
That wouldn't be a problem.
Just again, from where we were at the last meeting, remember we concluded the last meeting with a very lengthy, involved discussion about design guidelines. And staff heard that the direction was the guidelines generally are working, and we were going to make modifications to them as Stan walked us through earlier. But the major concern was that when the public got to see how and when these design decisions were made. And so from that, we came up with a participation process earlier, not a wholesale change to what the design guidelines are, or who or how they are applied. And this is the gut check. This is, again, I just want to make sure that's what we heard from the council. It's what we thought we heard last time. This would be the implementation of it.
I think that's right as far as what the goal is. As far as implementation, I need to think about it more, because I know there's other communities have a concept plan approval process before the formal application. So that, and I'll send this out in the next couple of days, Romeoville has a rather detailed development process that has a concept plan approval with formal notice, but concept plan approval does not constitute approval of everything else. So whether that would work better than this or this would work better than that, I haven't really had time to think about yet. But that's, I think the way you describe the goal is pretty much the goal. It's just what's the right way to implement it. And I know other communities have other ways of accomplishing the same goals. So before we resolve on how to do it, I'll look into that some more, and I'll share some stuff, and we can come back to it. But with that context, this is more in the direction I think that we need to go. Whether it's enough or the right one, I just haven't had enough time to fully digest it yet.
I mean, I think that's what's that old theory of logic where you try the simplest solution first? I don't remember if it's, I think it's Occam's razor. I had Loki's wager in my head. Occam's razor.
That's another one.
And we'll talk about that one another time. I think it makes sense. I think we try that before we get more, because I'm afraid at some point in time we got to land this plane, and it's not landed forever. We're not crashing the plane, we're just landing the plane. We visit these things over time, but I really don't. It's a cliche phrase, but I don't want perfect to be the enemy of good either. We've been at this a long time. We have.
I don't know about this aspect of a long time. We've been at this aspect about 4 days now. This aspect of it.
Again, it depends on where you draw your line. But then we still have to get into the phase of actually implementing this into ordinances, which is going to take more time. So we can talk about concept all day long, but then we got to write the ordinances, and that's going to take time too. So I would like to stay on track. So I think this makes sense because it also reminds me, for the reasons you just stated, it also reminds me of Commissioner Barnett will remember this well, the OASIS program, where we literally tried to keep designing and redesigning what we wanted, and every time we were dissatisfied because you can't design the future. Unless you can't hire an architect and design the whole town, because it's just like when you build a house. You build a house, you think it's great. A year later, what's the problem? I wish I would have done this. Why did we do this? You got to maintain that flexibility. I think the biggest thing you can do is to have an opportunity to get an early look and say, oh, whoa, wait a minute, this isn't what I want, because that's exactly what happened with Oasis. We would lay out all these parameters, and we laid out every detail that we were going to get nothing but projects we wanted, and then somebody would bring a project, and our reaction was, oh, well, that's not what I had in mind. And it was unfair to them because they had spent time and money pursuing it, and it was unfair to us because we'd spent all this time trying to design it. Where what really would have worked is if we would have had an early peek, an early look, and say, oh, gee, now that I see what you're doing, this isn't really what we have in mind. How about this? And then it was fair to the other person because they had invested the time and money and resources in going way down the path where it was too late. And we were able to give not only early input from the council and the staff perspective, but from the public perspective. I'd like to try this, and let's go with the simplest solution first.
But wait a minute.
Not try to design.
Try this, there's different flavors of this we haven't looked at yet. The idea of early review, absolutely.
Yeah.
But there's lots of towns that have early review done with different ways, and we haven't looked at any of those yet. So I can't say this is the right implementation compared to the concept plan approach, which numerous towns do. So basically, it would be very similar to this, except it would include a hearing. Where council and plan commission don't get to weigh in on this portion of it. They're not involved in that.
We're members of the public. Once we're paying attention, we weigh in and say anything else.
See, there's a lot of questions like that that this was put out on Friday. This very well might be the right way to do it. This was put out on Friday.
Well, give it some thought. I was just expressing my view.
Yeah, and there's plenty to work on all the other stuff we settled earlier. There's plenty to work on.
Well, that's actually what...
No, we're done with uses, and we got two specific requests on the height, setback, and density. No, it's not that much.
For my 2 cents, I'll be interested to see what you've got to send around. But I want to make sure that we're not creating too much bureaucracy. You know, yes, we need the early look, as the mayor said, but we don't want to end up... Well, I guess what we're trying to do is encourage the right kind of development, the right look, the right bulk, the right feel, not necessarily stop development. We want redevelopment. But
and remember that chart you had up on the wall with all those that really low tax rate? That doesn't happen by accident. Without the redevelopment, you end up at the bottom of that list.
I couldn't agree more. And I want to make sure that we're not discouraging development by creating a longer and longer and longer process.
And I don't think that's the intention with...
Oh, I know it's not the intention, but...
With either one of these. But yes, I think if we remain cognizant of that...
The law of unintended consequences is kind of...
Correct. I think there's...
I know that's not the intention. I just haven't seen it yet to know whether it is or not.
Right. Well, I'd like to see more examples, aside from Romeoville, that does this, because that's intriguing to me.
Right. Well, hearing, though, scares me. That, to me, is bureaucracy. A quick peek is one thing, but a hearing, because that then brings in issues. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Now you're dealing with a quasi-judicial, and no, thank you.
I'd like to, the whole thing scares me a little bit. I understand the goal. But think about the way Dave framed this up, and I didn't hear anybody jump up and say, no, Dave, you're wrong. We think that largely our design criteria, our design guidelines are accomplishing what we hope they accomplish, largely. And we're concerned about discouraging development and concerned about slowing down the process. So what are we doing here except, my concern is setting up missed expectations all over the place? Because at the end of the day, our ordinances are what have to be followed. And our design, if we say we got to be consistent with the design pattern book, it's got to be consistent with the design pattern book.
And all this stuff we just talked about for an hour and a half?
Yeah, well, okay, but a guy shows up at this thing, they're not going to show up at an open house without having to talk to our EDC, our downtown management team, and our staff team. They're not going to show up with a 11-story red barn for the first.
That's artisanal.
But I think that was actually, I think they might. And here's part of the thing was this idea of transparency. So what happens now is they come in with, in your example, big red barn. They come in with sort of a lump of clay, as the mayor would say sometimes. They have or even a very specific idea. And staff and Stan and his team review it all, and usually gets changed quite a bit, right? A lot, but nobody sees that.
But it happens in concert with our actual written ordinances and guidelines.
Yes.
Not with a bunch of people in a room with coffee just talking about what parts they don't
Right.
like.
Now, what's interesting about that is, our experience in the staff is, as long as the comments that are made by staff and the public fit within the ordinances, then the developers, 99% of them say, oh, yeah, I can do that, we can do that. Right. And that's been our experience. So we think that just allowing the public to see and participate in this process earlier, in a way that is not designed to add any actual review time. This is designed to take place within the time they're already getting their other things ready, right? The things bulk and traffic and parking. It's just the design element, which has for the curtain pulled back. We don't think it adds any more time, but we think it adds a ton of public participation where the public who attended the hearing or the open house would actually be able to see their comment manifest. Not everyone, and not every staff comment gets shown, but a lot of them will, and that was the idea.
Well, to the mayor's point, I would rather just try it. I'd rather try it and know we can change it and give it a shot, knowing what the goals are. In my gut, I'm concerned that expectations, particularly the public who have now been invited to participate, not really, are going to not be met, because they're still going to, at the end of the day, maximize their own personal
Yes.
financial within
I believe that will be true.
within our rules. And that could easily be pretty counter to the public's opinion of any particular project.
I believe that will also, I believe that will happen.
The only thing about this specific thing that I would like to change if we decide to just try and find a way to implement it is, we hear Greg's talked about it for years, we hear all the time about this, about the radius. And given the purpose of this and the real desire is to get people to feel engaged, more people, I'd just like to broaden that radius quite a bit.
Well, there's that, and here's a really crazy idea. Have we ever considered allowing people to sign up? We have the reverse 911, where people can sign up to be notified for certain things. People sign up if they want to be notified through our existing system of something that's on the agenda that's within the radius.
Yeah, as long as if you don't want to, if somebody misses that, you don't want there to be a violation of an ordinance, and that's always.
Well, I wouldn't say instead of.
Right.
It would be in addition to,
Yeah.
because to Marge's point, some people see the sign, some people read a notice, some people get an email.
Nobody reads the notices.
Some people read someone next door, but if you could sign up and say that if you were within whatever it is.
If for whatever reason that
150
failed, it would not.
Validate.
This is where the attorneys.
Well,
who deal
no,
with
it would be-
notices-
it would be in
It's
addition
in addition
to.
to,
Right.
right?
But it would change.
Not in lieu of.
Yeah. That's how, the reason, we've talked about this on and off for several years, and the
Yeah.
reason we've always shied away from it is because we think it's the law of unintended consequences, where people would actually say, I was supposed to have received notice, I didn't, therefore your application is flawed and you have a violation.
But we could always put it out through social media, through our website, that, hey, we've got an open house coming up on a project at fill in the address.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, it's not everything the mayor was talking about, but it's something.
Everybody should watch Ensign's body language on these. These can be really tricky. And
I can't
so-
see her, Stan's watching.
Yeah, so we'll, it's just a trade-off. So yeah, I will take that as direction.
Just a dumb question.
So,
So yes, I'd love to hear more thoughts on this, but I'd like to move forward with the idea of a quick peek, but if there's some other aspect of it that we can build in without.
But there's other ways of doing the quick peek.
Well, and we're assuming that it's a quick peek at something that, you know, we're all embracing with open arms and that the public doesn't like for some reason. Just because maybe they don't like it and maybe the people go away and it doesn't get any further, and maybe that's the idea.
Right.
So I don't know, then are we discouraging somebody? Well, yeah, because there was a reason.
Right, but in that case, well, yeah.
But
here's
we
what's
keep
gonna happen.
talking about this like we're discouraging people, like we want everyone to come. No, we don't want everyone to come, or we wouldn't be doing this.
No, that's not.
I don't know.
Within the constraints of our ordinances existing, we do want them to come. In fact, that's why we have the ordinances.
Well, the other thing is, what people don't see is how many folks do go away. But nobody ever sees that, because guess what? They don't make it onto an agenda. I can't tell you how many times I've had meetings with people say, I'd like to do X, Y, this in this town. It's not gonna happen. And that's it. Now, does anybody hear about that? Of course not. This would be an
I
opportunity for
understand
people.
that, Marty, I do.
This would be an opportunity for people to be a little bit more aware of that.
Exactly.
I hear all the time, is, oh, we never turn anything away. You don't see the ones that just come by and say, hey, we'd like to do this in your town. Because it's not, how do you say it? Say it with me, Bob, not consistent with our ordinances.
So I hear three council members, I think I hear saying this is direction,
I can't vote for this yet. Period.
and I hear,
I'm going this way, but I don't know if this is it yet.
okay, so here's what I'd like to propose. Let's separate this, and I'd like to get all the other things we've agreed to as a council team, get Stan and Enz on their teams going on these things. We'll package up all the areas that we think we've gotten really good direction. We'll do a little bit more homework on this issue, and we'll start to run these things concurrently, right? So while Stan and Enz are off.
And I'm not closed-minded to another aspect of it. I don't know what it is yet, so I can't comment.
That's why, that's why we can't decide.
That's what we can't decide.
Right, yeah.
At the moment, I mean, I've got no problem.
We're separating them, everything else, go.
Yeah, I know.
Let's keep catch up.
One's coming up with
Let's
all
keep
the
catch up.
process.
All right, I think then, from that perspective, I think staff has all the direction we were looking for.
No, because we haven't heard from the public yet.
Well, but I was going to say, before you go to the public, the one thing is we've got the setbacks in DT with a question mark by them. Do we
Yeah.
want to talk about what that question mark is right now, before we go any
I thought they were
further?
gonna work on that.
I think we're gonna go out and see.
They're gonna come back.
Some uses and see what's out there.
Okay.
We can report out on that as well. The nice thing about that is the way we're gonna write these ordinances, that will literally be a fill in the blank,
Okay.
so we can come back to that.
I'm done.
Thank you. Yes, sir?
The only thing on this is the meeting notification, to Bob's point. I don't know if the radius really matters. It's got to be more public because this is our downtown and that was the issue. So it's got to be like a notification in the newspaper, publish something, that way they can't say that they didn't get it, because that was the whole problem. I mean, 250 radius around there.
It's going to be on Bob's Facebook page, so that's good enough.
Yeah, but it blocks people.
Do you read any of the meeting notices? There's meeting notices all the time.
Broadcast.
Do you ever read them?
Yeah, but not this type of stuff. This wasn't on there.
But it's the same, to my point, the same notification aspects apply to any plan commission or to any zoning board meeting. Do you ever see those in the paper?
Oh,
Okay.
But this is, we're talking about something different, because we say follow current village requirements, but we're,
But those are the current village requirements, that's why I
Oh, I
asked.
understand your point. Your point, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the downtown is a special thing. Everybody has an interest in it, and therefore everyone's proximate to it, and there should be no 250 foot, because it's not some parcel in a neighborhood tucked away somewhere, it's the downtown. So there should be some more village-wide notification, that was
That's
your
true, and
point.
we heard that feedback.
Sure, you don't make it a legal requirement though, because you mess it up. then-
No, we're not making it illegal, but no, don't look at me that way. I'm not saying that.
We're calling everybody at home and,
I didn't say that, I was just translating his point, that's all. Don't shoot the messenger.
I'm just trying for clarification. Is it 500? Yeah. Is
That
it
was-
500 feet? I mean, I know that 250 feet, we've gone as far as to take all of the right-of-ways out, right, Stan?
Does not include right-of-ways.
Does not include right-of-ways, and, so, I mean, there have been tweaks even with that.
Yeah.
So, but I understand what he's saying.
That's all
I'm
we're
just
doing.
trying to,
Yeah.
because I've fought with this before, and I'm trying to figure out where that line is.
that's why I say you just have a notice, you put a notice in the paper, just like when you do foreclosure, you gotta notice it. And if they get it, they get it, and they don't, oh, well, they didn't read the paper.
Thank you. Other questions or comments on public participation from the public? Please.
I just think it's important. I want to see us go in this direction because there's so many times, and it's on me. I don't have a computer. I'm still living in the 50s. But it's, most time I'll go in and I'll read the board and say, oh, I see this is coming up, in 2 days. But I think the general public certainly deserve, I mean, it is their community, they deserve to have a good notice on what's going on. Then it's a report, it's either they come or they don't come, or they look into it, you know. If they don't, then they don't have any argument. But I would like to see this broadened where we have better participation or communication with the public on upcoming developments instead of what we have currently. So I would like to see this, how are you going to do it, whether it's in the newspaper or if it's on the website, you know, probably would be easier to reach people that way. And most folks at this day have, you know, communication. I'm out of it, but just.
And yet you're here tonight.
Yes, I am.
You took my point.
Thank you. Other questions, final questions in the audience? Well, thank you very much for everybody sticking around so late and participating. Obviously, this is an important project. As you can tell by the amount of time and effort and passion that has been put into it. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you and good night.